So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Brent Rogers and show you a few of the books that Brent has been a part of over the course of his career. Now, how many volumes of the Joseph Smith Papers did you help with?
6.
So 6 volumes in the Joseph Smith Papers out of 26 printed books Brent was a part of. And he is now the managing historian, I think is what it's called, of the Joseph Smith Papers project. So obviously been working on lots of this kind of thing for the last, that started in 2008, so 16 years, 17 years ago. Last year he published a book called Buffalo Bill and the Mormons. This is a fascinating, I was able to attend an event where he spoke specifically about this book, and this is a fascinating tell about the Mormon presence up in Wyoming, Cody, Wyoming, like named after Buffalo Bill Cody, and the interactions that the Mormons had with Buffalo Bill and his trying to privatize that area and develop it and tried to get people to come and settle. And the Mormons were setting their own settlers up there. So it's a very interesting history if you have an interest in seeing that interaction. Another recent publication that Brent helped with is this Brigham Young Journals, Volume 1. From what I understand, there will be 4 volumes in all. This is published by both the Religious Studies Center at BYU and Deseret Book, as well as the Brigham Young Center Foundation, which I'm not sure what that is. But he's one of the editors of this volume of the Journals of Brigham Young. And then...
Is that one currently available?
Yeah, this is currently available. These are $34.95. So... if anybody is here to ask him about how this differs with the previous version of the Brigham Young Journals, this is the night to do it. So, all right. So the event specifically tonight is regarding this book, "The Lord Spake Her Name: The Remarkable Story of Vienna Jaques," I think, in the Restoration.
I pronounce it Jaques.
Jaques. That's what I would have said too, but somebody else said it a different way. So, Jaques. I'm going to go with the expert here. I'm going to let him tell us more about her. But while we have a captive audience, there is an organization that will be dedicating the grave of Vienna Jaques with a new marker in the Salt Lake Cemetery on May 10th at noon, at which Brent will also be speaking. So if you're interested in seeing the grave marker that the Ensign Foundation, is that right? Is that the correct name these days?
Close enough.
Oh.
Ensign Peak.
Ensign Peak Foundation, I'm sorry, is paying for this new marker to be done. And I'd recommend any of you go to that has an interest. We have a copy of the flyer at the front counter for anybody that would like one. So, okay. All right, so with that, I'll turn over the time to our guest tonight, Brent Rogers, and thank you all for being here.
Okay. All right. Can y'all hear me? Well, thanks for being here tonight, and Chris and the Benchmark team, thanks for inviting me. This is a real blessing to be here, and it's always an honor when you get asked to come speak about your work. So I'm honored to be here. Let me start with the pronunciation of Vienna's last name, and I will say at the outset that there are a few different ways that I've seen it spelled that may give some insight into pronunciation. And so how she preferred her name pronounced, I don't know. She always spelled her name the same way, Jaques. Her contemporaries spelled it in a variety of ways, including Jakes, so if you phonetically pronunciate that, Jaques. And for me, that's the easiest to say, which is why I've taken historical evidence and said, I'm going to use that. There's also a spelling Jackes, S, which sounds more like Jaques. There's another one that is Jackaways, which could sound like Jacques or Jacques. So I go with Jaques because it's historically, there's evidence to support it, and it's easiest for me to say. But I will gladly be corrected by Vienna at some point if I've been saying it wrong this whole time. But I do know that she spelled her last name the same way, and even though a lot of people will add a C in front of the Q, she always had Jaquues. So that, I wanted to start there just so you know why I was pronouncing her name that way, and you may, want to correct me yourself, and that's fine too. But I'll tell you a little bit about how I came to know Vienna and why I ended up writing this book. So I had a professor in graduate school that said you should follow your interests and follow and write about the things that keep you up at night. What are the things that you're thinking about as you go to sleep at night? What are the things that when you wake up in the middle of the night, what do you start thinking about? And so I'll tell you how Vienna came to be one of those things that I couldn't stop thinking about. This was back in the summer of 2012. I had been working for the Joseph Smith papers for just over 6 months. Just over 8 months, excuse me. And I was working on Documents Volume 3, and that covers the most of 1833 and into 1834. And one of the documents that I was assigned to work on was a letter, September 4th, 1833, that Joseph Smith wrote to Vienna Jaques. And as I got to work on this, I was immediately interested in the fact that he was writing it to a woman, because I hadn't seen, other than his wife Emma, I hadn't seen Joseph address any letters to sisters. And so I went and checked, and before that time, there, at least in the Joseph Smith papers, and we've done a pretty good job with them. We don't have any other letters that Joseph wrote to a woman other than his wife Emma. By this point in his life, in September of 1833. And then I was simultaneously working on the annotation for Revelation dated 8 March 1833, which is now canonized in the Latter-day Saint Doctrine and Covenants as section 90, and Vienna is mentioned by name in that revelation. And so I became very captivated by this person, why she is in the Doctrine and Covenants, and why Joseph was writing to her. And so it started me on a path to try to find as much as I could about Vienna Jaques. Given the time constraints of working on the Joseph Smith papers and what annotation we could put into these documents, I knew there was more of a story to tell than we could put in the Joseph Smith papers, because by our policies and by the work that we were doing, we were trying to annotate to provide some contextual understanding, but we couldn't tell stories that weren't kind of immediately tied to the text at hand. And so as I was researching Vienna, there was so much that I couldn't put into Documents Volume 3 or into the annotation on the Doctrine and Covenants Section 90 Revelation, that I thought, well, I'll write this up into an article. And it was during this time that I went, as I was researching, I saw that she had been buried in the Salt Lake City Cemetery, and I went to pay my respects there. And I was very disappointed when I arrived at her marker. It's a pretty small stone, and on it simply says Vienna Jaques, 1833, as her birth year. She was born in 1797. And so I was actually pretty upset about this woman that I found so fascinating, that I'd been learning so much about, that was mentioned by name in the Doctrine and Covenants, that Joseph had a friendship with, that he wrote to her a lengthy letter. This I thought this couldn't be. Why would she have an incorrect year? I never did find out why, but it motivated me to do more research and to do more digging and to do more writing and to help people to get to know this woman and her incredible story, incredible journey of faith. Now, there are other publications that mention Vienna. They tell a pretty simplistic story about her. She was a wealthy woman who had been commanded to consecrate her means to the church, and she went on to live a long, faithful life. Just pretty basic story about her. But as I researched the many facets of her life, I found there was a whole lot more to say about her and her life story. And so as I continued researching, and I wrote one article that was published by the Ensign Peak Foundation in what was then Mormon Historical Studies and is now Latter-day Saint Historical Studies, and I published one in the Ensign, which is now called Leona. And I kind of thought that maybe my work on Vienna was done at that point. But I kept finding her in records as I was searching, and not looking necessarily for records about her. And as I continued to compile these bits and pieces of her life, I realized that there was even more that I could say about her than were in these two articles. And so I just kept looking and searching and finding. And I had to find them in sometimes obscure places and sources where maybe you wouldn't think to look. Although if you're in genealogy, you'd probably be like, yeah, those are definitely places to look. You always look in the little nooks and crannies of the record books to find people. But really it was a decade's, about 11 years worth of sleuthing to find as much as I could about Vienna Jaques. And this book is the result of that 11, 12 years worth of work. So let me tell you a little bit about Vienna's story, just a few bits and pieces, and then we can have some questions and conversation. And I will say that since we've already announced that there will be a new marker dedication coming up, Kim Wilson and the Ensign Peak Foundation have done a remarkable job of correcting the mistake that was on the previous gravestone. And I'm grateful to them for that work. It's a beautiful, befitting marker for this incredible woman. So if you have interest, I'd really recommend picking up one of the flyers and coming out on May 10th. It would be wonderful to honor Vienna and to be a part of that celebration. So let me just tell you a little bit about Vienna's history, some of the things that I came to find. And I guess I already made a mistake because I said 1797. I think when she was born, it was 1787. So, see, we sometimes misspeak. It's okay. We'll correct the record here. And the video can, so if somebody's like watching the video and then they're like, oh, he's wrong. I don't want to read that book. They would have been right until now. I've corrected it. But very little is known about her first 46 years of life. She was born in Beverly, Massachusetts, and moved to Boston in the 1820s. Vienna was an industrious, self-reliant woman who was a midwife and operated a boarding house among many enterprises. She was also a spiritual seeker. She sought out different faiths and was somewhat content at the Bromfield Street Methodist Episcopal Church in Boston, but she was very interested in healing, the power to heal, and in revelation. and she felt that the Methodist Church was lacking in those areas for her taste. And so when she read in a newspaper something about a new faith and a golden Bible, she wanted to learn more about this new scripture. She obtained a copy of the Book of Mormon and had kind of the first glance didn't really immediately draw her in, and she set it aside for a time. But she felt like she needed to read it again and read it fully. And she felt impressed to reconsider the Book of Mormon. Before she did, she later stated that she prayed and asked God to impress her mind in regard to its truthfulness. And then, feeling prompted, she read the book again, much more closely this time. And she later said that her mind became illuminated after reading the book. And then she decided to pray again. She prayed about the claims of the prophet and the new scripture. And she felt convinced of its divine authenticity, so much so that she, a single woman in her 40s, traveled from Boston to Kirtland, Ohio to see the faith in its own sphere and in its own place, and to learn more about this new church. And when she went to Kirtland, that's where she was baptized on July 12, 1831. And she, very shortly after that, was able to meet Joseph Smith for the first time. And Joseph taught her about the concept of gathering. After which she went back to Boston and and was there for a little while and decided to gather her stuff, sell off properties that she had acquired, and gather with the saints in Kirtland, Ohio. So she comes to Ohio in the fall of 1832, and shortly thereafter, she donates. We don't know how much. The record is not clear. There are various guesses and estimates and things like that, but there is no hard evidence to suggest how much. The sources that kind of hint at it just basically say that it was a large sum of money that she donated to the church. She had brought with her some liquid capital that she had liquidated some of her properties in Boston and came and gave that money to the church, and the church was able to purchase several parcels of land very shortly after that donation, including the Peter French farm, which is land on which the church eventually built the Kirtland Temple. So Vienna's contributions helped the church in its need to purchase lands to build the temple, helping to propel progress on that building structure. Joseph Smith wrote in his letter, that September 4 letter that I mentioned in 1833, that the contribution that Vienna provided was a savior of life as pertaining to the church's pecuniary concern, and that it was not forgotten by him or any others. And so when you read in section 90 of the Doctrine and Covenants, it mentions, the one that mentions Vienna by name, it talks about that she should have some of the money that she has donated to fund her travel to Zion, to Jackson County, Missouri, and that then the residue of the money would be kept for the Lord's purposes. And so she goes, in accordance with Revelation, to Jackson County, Missouri. And if you read in that section of the Doctrine and Covenants in verses 30 and 31, it states that Vienna should go up unto the land of Zion and receive an inheritance, that she may settle down in peace, inasmuch as she is faithful, and not be idle in her days from thenceforth. Well, she arrives in Jackson County just a few weeks before mobs attack the printing press there, and are throwing all of the printing equipment out into the streets and tearing roofs off of houses and tarring and feathering Edward Partridge, and not sure she's seeing that she'll settle down here in peace, right? Like this becomes kind of the story of Vienna, but also the story of the church, right? There's not they're not finding peace in these places that they're moving, but she does remain faithful. She stays in Jackson County and helps the saints, helps the Zion's camp when they come, healing them, or not healing them, but providing help when they're ailing and sick, and then eventually she moves on to Nauvoo with the main body of the saints. And so on the cover of the book, you'll see there's an artist rendering of Vienna's on the horse in the Mississippi River, and next to her are Jane Nyman and Harvey Olmsted, and this is the first baptism for the dead that takes place. So on September 12, 1840, that's when this event happens. The artist who did this painting, his name is Anthony Sweat, and it's quite a lovely piece. But you can see Vienna on horseback. She was very interested in eternal salvation and the possibility of eternal salvation for her deceased ancestors. And she had learned that Jane Nyman was going to the river to be baptized for her deceased son. And so Vienna, having learned about this, gets on her horse and rides as quick as she can to the river to observe the ordinance. And so as Harvey grasps Jane and says aloud a baptismal prayer, there was no set precedent for baptism for the dead. There was no set prayer at this time. But they go through with the ceremony, and Jane was submerged and brought back out of the water, feeling that she had been reborn and baptized for her deceased son. And Vienna Jaques was a witness as this ritual practice of vicarious baptisms was born. So that evening after this took place, Joseph Smith had learned that this baptismal ceremony had occurred, and he inquired about the form of words that Harvey Olmsted used for the baptism. Olmsted reported to him what he had said, and Joseph Smith approved and said that it was proved that Father Olmsted had it right. And then he consulted with Vienna Jaques, who was there and who witnessed. Vienna confirmed to Joseph Smith what she had observed and what she had heard, reassuring him that it was done as Olmsted had described. And she later testified that the words that Olmsted used during that first vicarious baptismal prayer were precisely the same as was used afterward for that ceremony. So I think it's a pretty remarkable event in not just Vienna Jaques' life, and not just in Jane Nyman's life, and not just in Harvey Olmsted's life, but in the development of this doctrinal concept for the church, and then in the practice that has been done millions upon millions of times ever since. And so she was there at its outset, and then she went on to participate in baptisms for the dead. I didn't do an exhaustive search, but she was comparable with a lot of her contemporaries in terms of among the highest numbers. She was baptized or served as proxy for more than 50 baptisms while she lived in Nauvoo. This was a practice that she was captivated by and continued to be captivated by and continued to put her efforts towards as she moved to Utah. So I think the last little event that I want to talk about as it pertains, there's obviously a lot more that I could talk about and would love to, but that's why the book's there, right? So she drives her own wagon team across the plains and is among the first companies to arrive in the fall of 1847, and she does eventually get a lot of land that she is able to build on, and she's lives the next 30 years diligently serving her neighbors and serving the church and serving the Lord. The last event that I want to talk about is an old folks excursion in the 1870s. So I was particularly interested in this from a scholarly perspective because I guess I didn't know a lot about this movement to honor what they called the old folks. So Bishop Edward Hunter inaugurated an old folks committee in 1875 after Latter-day Saint photographer C.R. Savage, is it Charles Savage, had approached him about an idea. He was walking to work and observed an elderly woman sitting alone on her porch day after day, month after month. He assumed that others lived in such a lonely existence as they aged, and he approached the 82-year-old presiding bishop, Edward Hunter, about the idea for a free annual excursion for the elderly. Hunter really liked this idea, and he asked Savage and his clerk, George Goddard, to assist in making the arrangements. And it was kind of seen as an innovative celebration. It intrigued many in the local press. Lula Green Richards, the editor of the Woman's Exponent, called the event skillfully planned and an event never to be forgotten. It would have staying power in that for the next decade and more, they had annual old folks excursions, both in the summer and in the winter. It became something of a movement in the Intermountain West, and it featured such people as Vienna Jaques. And so she was asked to speak at the first two of the old folks excursions, and in the one in 1876, she was able to speak in front of hundreds of attendees. We don't know exactly what she talked about that day. It's lost to history, like so much of the other parts of Vienna Jaques' life. But she could have spoken on any number of stories or topics. She could have described her early witness and testimony of the Book of Mormon. She could have talked about being baptized in Kirtland, Ohio, after having taken a solo journey from Boston. She could have talked about meeting Joseph Smith for the first time. She could have given the details of her working with missionaries Samuel Smith and Orson Hyde to spread the gospel message. She could have talked about the purchasing of the land on which they built the Kirtland Temple. She could have depicted the horrors of the violence she witnessed in Missouri. She could have told about the time she traveled across the plains. She could have told about her experience with the first baptisms for the dead. She could have told about a lot more that happened in the intervening 30 years. But what we do know about those old folks events is that they had the opportunity to serve as a living link to the past. And oftentimes there were younger, in whatever town they were held, they invited the younger generations of Latter-day Saints to come and experience, to hear from people who had lived through so much and had maintained their faith. These celebrations of the aged functioned as these really faith-affirming events, both for the people who were facing the end of their mortal lives and for those who were there to witness them. And in these ways and in many others, it's Vienna Jaques' story that helps connect us to a past that shows what it means to believe Vienna believed deeply in the things that she learned and in the Book of Mormon that she read. And when it says in Doctrine and Covenants section 90 that she may settle down in peace inasmuch as she is faithful and not be idle in her days from thenceforth, that could be, in a very short way, an apt descriptor of Vienna's life. She was faithful. She lived her faith. She taught others about her faith. And she was never idle. The records of her in the Relief Society and the amount of things that she grew on her property to donate to the Relief Society, to her neighbors, to the church at large are incredible pieces of evidence to show that she was never idle. She was always a hard-working, resolute, and self-reliant person. And it's pretty remarkable to me as you trace the course of Vienna Jaques' life and see how she endured many trials with patience and eventually saw the promise of revelation as she worked. As she worked and worked, she found her place of peace, and she did remain idle. I mean, she did remain faithful and never idle, and that is, I think, an important trajectory in the story of Vienna Jaques' life, and something that comes out in the book. So I think I'll leave it there and see if we have any questions about Vienna.
Well, I've got a question but some comments, if I may.
Please.
We all have our Vienna journeys that are separate. Yours and mine will kind of connect, and they do, but our pathways were independent of each other,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm surprised, to find this book that comes out as we're honoring Vienna. So thank you for that book, and it's wonderful. Two observations. She lived to 96.
Yeah.
And for a pioneer lady, that's an incredible age. I mean, she defied off the charts. And so a long life. And the second thing is, if you read the scripture, D&C 90, it gives her a title that is unique. And we've put it on that headstone,
Yeah.
Handmaid of the Lord. Who gets that? Maybe all women do, because she was not a recognized leader,
Yeah.
but she was just faithful. Handmaid of the Lord. That's pretty cool from the lips of the Lord.
Yeah.
So those are just some observations. It's an incredible book. Oh, and I do have a question. Here's my
Yeah.
question. A copy of her Book of Mormon
Yes.
is featured. Where is that? Who's got that?
The Church History Library has Vienna Jaques' copy of the Book of Mormon. So when she arrived in Kirtland to move there to gather with the saints in the fall of 1832, Joseph Smith gifted her a copy of the 1830 edition of the Book of Mormon and inscribed his name on that. And that is in the possession of the Church History Library downtown. And actually, I think is on display now in the Church History Museum.
Oh, better go see it.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Anyway, fun.
Yeah, and I think your point about the title she's given of Handmaid of the Lord is a very interesting title, and I wonder if there were more women mentioned by name in Revelation, if we might see that in other places, because as far as I understand that word, and maybe I am wrong, but it generally is a gendered term for servant. And we see the word servant and servant of the Lord often in Scripture, and in my servant Joseph, right, or others who might be considered to be leaders in the church are called servants or servant of the Lord. And so I think it's interesting, and I wonder if we can just see Vienna in that same way as being a faithful servant of the Lord. But it is kind of neat that she has that unique title and moniker. Yeah. Yes.
You had mentioned that what sparked your interest in her was a letter that Joseph Smith wrote to her. Do you remember what was in that letter?
It's a very lengthy letter, actually. There's a whole chapter on it in the book, actually, because it's very so. Joseph has just recently heard about the travails of Jackson County. So right, as far as he knows from Missouri, in July, Vienna had arrived safely, and things. So the letters take several weeks to get from Jackson County to Kirtland, Ohio, and he had received a letter that just said Vienna arrived safely, and he was grateful for that. And then in August, mid-August, is when he hears about the events of July 20 and July 23 in Jackson County. And so it's just a couple of weeks later that he's writing this letter to Vienna. And he describes feeling prompted to write the letter, feeling that she had been praying for some word of comfort, and which makes sense, right? She's traveled from Boston, donated an incredible amount of money to the church, told by revelation to move to Zion and to participate in the gathering, and within weeks of her arrival is just inundated with violent activity. And I can very much imagine her praying and wondering why this is happening. And so Joseph writes about this prompting that he's had to write to her. And then he writes about some other people that she may have known from Boston, or that he knew that she knew from Boston, gives some updates on these folks who are in Kirtland. And then he gives some business for her to tell to the church leaders in Missouri. And I find that part to be very fascinating, that he trusts Vienna to convey some pretty vital information. He could have stopped the letter at any point and then written another letter and sent it in the same package to Edward Partridge or somebody else, William W. Phelps down in Missouri. And he chose to entrust Vienna with this information, and for her to take it to the church leaders there to discuss. So that's I'm being a little broad and general about the contents of the letter, but it's lengthy, and there's a lot in there, and in fact there's so much that it really is a whole chapter in the book because it deserves it. Yes.
So you were talking about how besides Emma, she was the first woman that he had ever written to.
Yeah.
Did she get sealed to Joseph, or did she ever have the chance to get married, or?
Great question. So let me see if I can answer this in chronological order. So we have evidence of her marrying a man named Daniel Shearer sometime between 1835 and 1839 in Missouri. And there's very little evidence about it other than one of the redress petitions is written by Daniel Shearer and writes about his wife Vienna and what they had lost in the Missouri violence, and then those two separate sometime before 1845, and again we don't know the details of the separation. They traveled. They went to the Nauvoo Temple at different times. Vienna is not going by Shearer at this point in the records of the temple.
So they're both active, but not married anymore.
Yes, the way that I do is separated because I never saw like a bill of divorce, but so they go through the temple, get their endowments separately. They are assigned different companies to travel across the plains. Like I mentioned, Vienna drives her own wagon and own team. Daniel Shearer stays behind at winter quarters a little bit longer, and then he actually marries another woman whom he moves to Salt Lake City with. They live in different residences, and meaning Vienna and Daniel are in different residences in different wards. So she was married for a very brief period of time. I don't know, there's not hardly any documentation around that marriage. As for the sealing, there is evidence that she was sealed to Joseph Smith after he was dead. So in 1857, she went to the endowment house and was posthumously sealed to Joseph Smith. And that's the only sealing on record with her name on it. So we had here and then there.
I have a couple questions. First, how did she come with the money to buy all that property in Boston? And then where was her property in Salt Lake?
Yeah, good questions. Okay, let me see here. I'm looking up the Salt Lake one. So, again, kind of a mystery because there's just not a lot of documentation about Vienna's early life. My research suggests that a lot of it was through hard work and toil and being a saver. I think that she may have gotten some family money because her only brother passed away pretty early, and so any inheritance would have been split between her and her sister. And then there is some evidence about her sister having some means. So if they had some inheritance and then she was kind of a very hard worker and scrupulous saver, she was able to kind of acquire. She owned a home in Boston, out of which she ran kind of a boarding house and other services. She actually also acquired a second residence in Providence, Rhode Island. But the details, I can't give you any more than what I just did, because the records aren't there. As for where she lived in Salt Lake City, she wrote to Brigham Young in 1848. She'd been living in her wagon, and she wrote saying basically that my wagon is tattered and I can't possibly live in this thing another winter, and I need to be able to have a place to build a home. And so she obtained, and I'm not sure the specifics because the records are super clear, but the lot of land which was become her permanent residence was on 3rd East Street between 1st and 2nd South. And so she was in the 12th Ward in Salt Lake City. And that's where she built a modest adobe home and an outbuilding for animals. And she grew all sorts of different fruits and vegetables on her property. And she did a lot with her cows, and milk and butter and those kind of things. Sister, yeah.
Did she keep a diary?
She did not. In fact, there's very few surviving records from Vienna Jaques. Most of what I was able to find was in sources that were not directly tied to her. The couple of examples that we do have of her handwriting come from letters that she wrote to Brigham Young, and then we have some some letters that he wrote to her. But mostly the sources that I found of her are not. So if you did a search in a catalog for Vienna Jaques, there isn't a lot that comes up of original sources. You have to go wanting to find her, and I spent a long time wanting to find her.
Are there any images of her, pictures of her?
One, yeah, and it's in the book. And that's a photograph that she sat for in 1867, at, I believe it was at the Martin Photoshop. I don't know what photographers, but yeah, the image is, I think, very early on in the book. Yeah. So we go here and then there, and then I'll come back to you.
Just two questions. I want to ask Chris's question about the Brigham Young journals and how they differ from the signature book journals. What's the approach, or how is that different?
Yeah.
And then just quickly follow up. I think there's a lot of, not a lot, but a few lists of Joseph Smith's wives, and I believe she shows up on a few of those. And so some people seem to think she was,
Yeah.
but you say that all the evidence is this late sealing.
Yeah, so I'll answer the plural marriage question. There's no evidence of her being a plural wife of Joseph Smith's.
You can't see it.
Just straight out.
Wishful thinking on the parts
Yeah.
of the list makers, perhaps.
Yeah, I think where people get that is that, gosh, now I'm blanking on the name, but there were all the affidavits written in the 1860s, and these were written out before they were approached they went to the people whose names were in them. And one was written for Vienna, but she did not sign it.
Okay.
And in fact, throughout her life, denied being a plural wife of Joseph Smith. And she was approached other times to be a plural wife, and she did not accept those. She did not, so she did not participate in plural marriage. So that is probably where those folks that would put her on that list gather from. Like, oh, they saw all these lists of affidavits, and her name is written in there, but she did not sign it. And so that's where that misconception happens.
That makes sense. Okay.
In terms of the Brigham Young journals, I don't know what to say about it. I just think we have something that we've been working on for a little while before we even knew about the other project. So Ron Esplin, who's been an incredible church historian for decades and decades, and wanted to start work on Brigham and invited me to come help in 2017. And at that stage, I don't think either of us, I certainly didn't know anything about the other project. And so we were wanting to give to Brigham Young's journals the treatment we gave to the Joseph Smith journals and Joseph Smith papers, which is a very thorough, careful, textual, review and annotation, and we wanted to provide context. And so I think we've done a really good job of making a very accurate transcription of Brigham Young's journals, and with the first one, which is all of the pre-Utah journals and Brigham's holograph or his handwritten journals. So we have put all of those into volume 1. We're anticipating doing 3 more volumes that will take us through the end of Brigham's office journals. So from the 1850s onward, there is no Brigham Young handwritten journals. They're all office journals. And so we're planning to give the same treatment to those. And so I think that what we have is a really excellent product, and what we have is something that's started that we're going to finish through. I don't think you just stop a project just because somebody else is doing something similar. So, yes, sir, in the back.
Did she have any kids by chance?
She did not. Yep, no children. And you had a
So with the letters that they wrote between each other, Brigham Young and her,
Mm-hmm.
does or that or anything else give an insight into her decision with the succession crisis to go with the Saints West?
No, I mean, there's nothing in the letters that offer insight
There's a
into
testimony.
her into her insight. I mean, that she's there
Sure.
and that she
But there's nothing else, other documents that show that.
No, there is no nothing written from her perspective that explains her decision to travel with the saints to Salt Lake City. So we can speculate, but that's all it would be. Other questions? I guess we're good. Hey, thanks everybody for coming out. This was great. Appreciate all the questions, and for those who choose to read the book, I really hope you enjoy it, and you'll learn a lot about Vienna and hopefully something new about the early church as well. Thank you.